So now we're going to talk about bows and just go through some of the options that you have that can make your bows really successful. The first thing I'd like to do is talk about the silk abaca, and the reason for that is that there are two ways that you can do it, straight grain and bias. So first of all, the straight grain is very similar to the, I call them four-fold, but they've actually only got three folds. It's 4 layers. So you can see there I've just gone along the straight grain line, and that because of the direction of the silk abaca, they fold up quite easily, and if you just give them a little press, and then they can hold the shapes that you give them. You don't need to put any wire in, and you can see that they behave really well. This is another one. Just remember when you're doing your curving or whatever you're wanting to do with them, that you will find that if you keep it turning the same direction all the time, see that opens up because the outside has to travel a lot further than the inside. So the way that you deal with that is you just reverse the turn every time you go through, just to make sure that if there's any extra disparity between the two distances, that gets cancelled out, and you can smooth it out a little bit, and once you've got it the way you like it, you can do a few stitches to hold it together. With the ends, if you've got the ends visible, all you need to do is put a little bit of your glue on, squeeze those two sides together, and then just snip. Right, that's your silk abaca. Now this thing here was made using Paris cloth, and what I've done is I have sewn, and I actually have a diagram, so I'll go grab it and if I can show it to you. I've given some instructions to myself. So I created I think it's called a chevron shape, but I might be corrected on that. And that's the shape, and you cannot see the grain line, but the grain line is that's a straight grain, and so the grain line is going like that. So it's on the bias, and there is a diagram of what happens if you sew just a seam allowance from the distance, back stitch there and there, ditto there and there, and then turn the whole thing inside out. When I did this yesterday, I didn't have a sewing machine with me. I do now, so I'll be correcting it. When I did that bagged out one, I gave it a little press after I did it. Now the loops are also made using just the material cut on the cross, and with the loops I didn't put anything, I didn't sew those, that's just flipped into the center and then bunched up. You need to know that if you've got a client that's poking around inside, slap their fingers. This is a lot flatter and quicker and easier than bagging it out. The thing about bagging it out in a bow in this thing is either you'll see the seam line on the ridge, or you'll find the bulk from the seam line coming from inside when you press it. So I've bunched that together, and I've used this piece, created a loop with it and tucked it in there, and you can see that issue with the bagging out here, which I'll have to tuck in and sew together. If you wanted to, you could insert a bit of trim wire, or the wire that you've been using, any cotton covered wire, but not brim wire because it's a bit too strong. You could actually insert that in on the seams if you wanted to make sure that goes in the direction you want it to. Okay, so we've talked about silk abaca. This is actually Paris cloth. You can see it's not glossy like silk abaca. Silk abaca's got a shine to it, and it's a little bit finer than the Paris cloth, but that's the way that works. Now, talking about making bows and making them stand up, the same strategy can be used with your, and I think silk dupion's a really good fabric to use for this, but any lightweight, nice quality fabric will be fine. And in here I have my beautiful mauve silk dupion cut on the bias, as you can see, and it's got a little bit of a residual fold in it, and inside I'm using this stuff. You know what it is, it's crin, And the crin, the way I described the bow that you can make with crin is that it looks a little bit like a Minnie Mouse bow. And folding that back to the centre like this, you can see it creates a nice springy looking bow. And just while I'm on the subject, this is really bringing home why everything is on the bias with millinery, because if you tried to do the same thing using the silk on the straight grain, you would find that you get corners on the inside. But with this one, I can spring that down into the bow shape. I'm pressing that, and you can see that's come up very nicely. And again, no seams in this, no sewing. I could just pin this together or clip this together and put a tie over, and with the tie over I've just cut myself a piece of offcut from the corner when I was creating the bias, made that into a little rectangle, folded that in on each side so that the raw edges aren't visible, and then bunched it up like that, bunched it up, and then just put the tie over the edge of the bow, over the middle of the bow I mean to say, and then cut that off and stitch that down. Remember, it doesn't have to look neat at the back, so just make those edges meet, don't make them overlap, because apart from being on the bias, it's a really good idea to avoid lots of bulk. Now, the other interlining which I really like, and again, the more information that you can gather in your life about interlinings, the more power you have for getting the effects that you really want. Inside here, I've actually done some organza, and I've done the same fold over and then put that together like that. And you can see there, it's a little bit more subtle, it's a bit less springy, and it will hold shapes that you want it to, but it won't flop down. And it is actually probably the one I think is a little bit more sophisticated. That said, if I wanted to, and I must tell you about the Pinterest page, if I wanted to, I could do that as a couple of loops. Oh, how am I going to show you that? Oh, don't worry, you can imagine it. And that's a really, that can be quite a useful little motif. The other thing applies, going back to that chevron effect, so we're cutting the shape like this, putting it together, and we can machine this, and I thought I was going to machine for you, but you know how to do that, making sure that you leave a gap to turn it inside out. And if I just fold this back and just pretend we've sewn it, these little tails, they sit really well. Now, while we're on the subject of the tails, see that there, that's that mitre cutting, and here's an example on a piece of ribbon. That's a mitre cut tip. I almost would never leave it a straight cut, because I think that just looks a little bit raw and a little bit unfinished. And I'm looking for, and I'm not seeing, I thought I brought it over. I'm going to just quickly show you the other one, which is great for when you're making bows with ribbons. Scissors instead of clippers. And this is called a swallowtail, and it sort of reminds me very much of when your mother was doing your hair when you had ponytails or pigtails or whatever at school when you were a child. I also wanted to talk briefly about crin with you, and I'm going to just show you. With this crin, you'll see there's a thread at the side of it, and if you are going to have a visible crin bow, like that sort of arrangement, you need to take that thread out, because it's really not part of the beauty of the design. And when just to do that, you draw it out, and you can see what that's doing to your crin, and you may find that that is a thing that you would like to play with, and you use that thread, pull it tight, wrap it, and then just embed all that in some glue, and you can see it's starting to curl up and go springy, which is fabulous. Here's something I prepared earlier. This one here could be part of your design if you wanted to go that way. On the subject of cutting crin, it's a really good idea, and again, I'm in lockdown at the moment. I found my little swallowtail. It's there. You can use a soldering iron, and that heat seals the ends of the crin, which are inclined to fray fairly quickly. You can see there, listen, look at me deliberately trying to fray it, so that you can see. If you heat cut it, so with a soldering iron, or you can use a little tiny bit of Yoo-hoo glue. You have to be really, really super clever with that. You can also machine zigzag a wire onto the edge, and again, it's just that lightweight cotton covered wire. And the reason I'm standing up and looking around is because I had a piece of Rouleau which I wanted to show you, and now it's disappeared. All right. Oh, here it is. Now, this is Rouleau, which is basically, again, bagged out, which is the sewing it inside out and turning it the right way out. But you can buy Rouleau as well, not as nice as homemade. And you can use that to make little subtle bows, and then just either flip it in at the end or tie a little knot in the end and just make it a nice finish. With the wire, wherever you've got wire inside anything, you need to just bend it back on itself so that it doesn't work its way through whatever you're doing. I hope that covers everything that we need to talk about. Go to, when I send you this video, I'll also give you a Pinterest page. If you go onto Pinterest and you don't have the link, you can just search millinery bows, and there are so many different options. There is a couple of images that I like very much of turban kind of shapes with this kind of thing, which is related to bows but not exactly a bow. Anyway, I hope that gets your creative juices going, and look forward to seeing what you can do with that.